Support for Veterans Corner Radio is made possible by M&M Printing and the Observer News of Ruskin, Florida.
Hello and welcome to Veterans Corner Radio Podcasts, information for and about veterans. Former United States Marine Corps Gunnery Sergeant Josh Porthouse returns to talk with host Joe Mulberger about Josh's podcast, Transacting Value. Today, you'll discover how Sergeant Porthouse took his own difficult times and turned them into a podcast focused on healing. His outreach has been a benefit to over 200 people from around the world and has been a help to both fellow veterans and people from all walks of life. Here now is Joe Mulberger with Veterans Corner Radio on Veterans Corner Radio Podcasts.
Welcome to Veterans Corner Radio, a show dedicated to providing information to all those who have served our country's military and to their families. Now, here is your host, combat veteran and educator, retired United States Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Joe Mulberger.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to today's show. You're listening to Veterans Corner Radio. I'm our host, Joe Mulberger. Today we have United States Marine Corps, formerly Gunnery Sergeant Josh Porthouse. And I say formerly because once a Marine, always a Marine. And when we talk about the other service components, we say a former member of, but we can't do that with Marines, Josh. We just can't do that. Josh, tell us a little
why?
bit. Why is that?
Because it's a character development in the Marine Corps. It's a profession development in every other branch.
So there's a lot of truth to the phrase, you enlist in the other service components, you become a Marine.
Yeah, I haven't heard that, but yeah, absolutely. And that's the difference, right? Like the guy in the 90s in the recruiting commercial that climbed the mountain and he's whatever in his regular clothes, and he gets to the top and there's a pillar of fire and he draws the sword and does the thing and then he's in his blues. Remember that?
Yes.
Yeah, that's as close to, I guess, manifesting the hero's journey concept that the Marine Corps takes you through from boot camp till whenever you get out. I don't care if it's 2 years or 22 years or whatever. That is exactly what happens, right? Like not in any literal sense, obviously, but in every metaphorical sense, absolutely.
Well, for me, the commercial that stands out, I played rugby for a while, and it's the more current Marine Corps commercial where people are getting in the mud and they're doing all this stuff. And then there's some young lady who just pops up in the camera and she's in the middle of a rugby match. And I'm like, yeah, her.
Yep. That explains the size of your neck. I imagine in the scrum, you were just pushing.
I would growl in the scrum as an intimidation factor. And I never collapsed the scrum. Sometimes I had it go upward. And the thing you don't want is for it to go downward. And they call that collapsing the scrum. And then the guy you're trying to hold up, the hook, ends up getting his neck squashed or his head driven into the ground. That's a good 12 metric tons of pressure going on. And that's where, if all the parents standing on the side lines going, rugby's so dangerous. Well, that's the only key dangerous point is making sure that the hook does not get his head smashed into the ground in the scrum. So I proudly boast that I never allowed the scrum to collapse. So
it's a good thing that rugby is not a team sport then.
Oh, it's a wonderful sport. But we're here to talk about something that you've come up with since you got out of the Marine Corps, and it's this transacting value. We've got this podcast, Veterans Corner Radio. You have a podcast, but it's gone through some machinations, some segments in time. But before we get into all of that, anybody that's interested in transacting value, the name of the podcast, run by Josh Porthouse, there's significance. So the best way to get a hold of you is on email at Porthouse, which is JPorthouse at SD, like doggy, YTMedia.com. So jporthouse at SDYTmedia.com. Or they can give you a call at 813-421-9249. And of course, folks go, what was that number again? It's 813-421-9249. So tell us, you get out of the Marine Corps as a gunnery sergeant. Everyone knows full metal jacket, and they're like, man, that's a kick-ass rank to have, gunnery sergeant. And you start this podcast called Transacting Value. Tell us what it's about.
Identity crisis.
What?
Identity crisis.
Give us a little concept about what that means.
Okay. So have you ever seen the movie This Is Doubtfire, Robin Williams?
What's it called?
This Is Doubtfire with Robin Williams?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, he dresses up as a Scottish nanny to stay involved in his kids' lives and, whatever. Okay, so that's basically what happened to me, minus all the theatrics, I guess. But that's basically what happened to me. It got to a point where in the first 10 years of my career, I had deployed 6 times. And within that, I really had, I went to the Defense Language Institute in Monterey, California for 18 months. So that's non-deployable.
What language?
Mandarin.
Mandarin Chinese.
Mandarin Chinese, which, as you might assume very accurately by our dual monotone voices, it was difficult. It's a tonal language, and not to mention the vocabulary and everything else. It's a strenuous course, is my point, though. And of those deployments, I'd say about 3 years deployed, every other month training, out in the field, away from home, another 3 years training, plus 18 months training, still not at home. That leaves me 18 months to try to build up my family in 10 years. And in total, anyways, and as you might imagine, it failed. I collapsed the stuff. And mentally, emotionally, I just overexerted, I think, everything and basically had a breakdown. And the first 7 years of my son's life, we were long distance. There really wasn't any continuity for me. And I couldn't figure out why that was, or who I was, or who I wanted to be in that process or after. And in a large part, I guess, for my overall development, it was because of my work ethic. I didn't see it any other way. There just wasn't any other way to view it. Like, I have to work. I'm the only one paying bills. I'm the breadwinner of the family, and that's just it, right? So, like, I can't not work, especially in the military. I did not show up. I have a sick day. No, your sick day is okay. Let's go do more pull-ups, and you won't be sick anymore. You just work through some of that stuff, and it builds a degree of resilience. It builds a degree of professionalism and bearing and stability and stewardship of all of these character traits and values that, whether you talk about them or not, they harden over time and they sort of embolden the character development. Well, once I had this little breakdown in 2021, I was going through a course to be an interrogator. And, well, actually, I guess that was 2019. I was going through this course to be an interrogator, 2019 and 2020. And a large part of that skill set revolves around either empathy or just thinking. And the only way that happens effectively, to have conversations with people and not to manipulate the outcome of a conversation necessarily, just it's a large part persuasion. Let me say that. But you got to know yourself. Otherwise, if you don't have a baseline for yourself, there's no way you can empathize with anybody else. It's just not, by definition, it's not possible. You can't know what it's like to be in somebody else's shoes if you don't know what you felt like when you were wearing them. And so, going through that course, I started to realize that my entire professional life had totally detracted not only from my personal life, but also my ability to know myself, which directly impacted my self-worth when I realized, man, maybe she's right. All the points she brought up, all the insults, all the verbal abuse, whatever you want to call it, we were going through the divorce process. My ex-wife and I had a very contentious year and a half doing it. And again, being what I was told was the Disney dad, the guy who didn't want to be involved or wanted somebody else to raise his kids because he wanted to go live the fast life, whatever. I was like, you know what? Maybe I can change that. a lot of the time growing up, my parents divorced when I was 3 or 4, and we saw our dad once a month, maybe, especially early on, if he showed up at the meeting. Sometimes he didn't even show up. And for whatever reason, it's not the point of this conversation, but I got to thinking, you know, I spent my entire life up to that point running away from any sort of reminder of what my parents were like or what I thought they were like growing up. The stuff that I didn't want to embody. Married to work, always anxious, always worried about the next thing, avoiding other whatever. And the thing that nobody told me was, you can run as far as you want, but I'll tell you what, Joe, that track is a circle. So I started realizing that what I was doing is exactly some of the stuff that they were doing, and I made a conscious decision not to have the outcome be the same. And the only thing I could think of in the beginning was start having conversations and put them on YouTube. That's all my son wanted to watch at the time. Put them on YouTube and just try to teach him stuff. Because if I can't talk to him on the phone.
So, Josh, you've had life experiences that lead you to a tough moment where you've got to slow things down for yourself. And when you come out of it, you register with a conversation, and this develops into a podcast for you. Is that right?
This was my pillar of fire at the top of the mountain. Yeah.
How did you come up with the name Transacting Value as the name of your podcast?
It was initially meant to be a double entendre, but the idea was if I could have conversations about character, then I have to have some way to ground it. And the only thing I had found up to that point that everybody I had encountered in my entire career or life had in common was implicitly or explicitly, intuitively or intentionally, every single person relies on a value system to make decisions when they get into a position where they lose sight of who they are. Yeah, that's the only thing you can come back to. Usually it's pretty innate. And so after talking to maybe 220 people on the show about the impact of their value systems during identity crisis, it really kind of proved my theory.
So let's talk to, because it sounds like what you've captured is the Watterson, who's the cartoonist that does Calvin and Hobbes, where the little boy, Calvin, says to his dad, there's no how-to book on parenting, is there? After, another moment where you roll your eyes and go, this kid is more genius than anything going on around him. But it sounds like in your show, tell us about the format of this show, and then give us an idea of someone that was in the military like yourself that had a similar something happen that you can express or present that was really a reinforcement of the value of the podcast called Transacting Value.
Of all the people that I talked to, there were a lot of really great conversations. In the beginning, season 1, season 2, I was anxious. I was nervous. I was uncomfortable. It was all in unfamiliar territory, trying to intentionally have a guided conversation, as you might imagine, Joe. And that led me to not have as many guests the first 2 seasons. So what I did was I created 4 different characters. I gave them each their own sort of accent, and I gave them each a little bit different of my emotional baggage, and I interviewed myself. And it was really entertaining for me at the time, but to go back and watch it now, it's very cringy. So I don't recommend anybody start with season 1. But if you do want to see the whole metamorphosis, and now I'm a butterfly, Joe, go start with season 1. Because by the time we get to season 6, we've talked to veterans, we've talked to nursing school students, I've talked to people in Australia, in France, I've talked to people all over the country. I think South America so far is the only continent I haven't touched. And all different walks of life, all different ages, all different generations, okay, all different careers and experience levels. Everybody had the same general vibe that when they got into a position where their perceived role in society had changed and was disaligned to their identity, they were lost. They were untethered, you might say. And the only thing that really started to ground them was, I don't want to say a belief system because it's not a religion. It's deeper than that. It's more self-centered than that. It's a value system. And so, for example, at one point, I had a former platoon commander. He got out before I did, but we got back in touch online. And a few years after he got out, just happened to strike up a conversation and eventually coaxed him into coming on. Well, he was a oncologist, med school student and wanted to be specializing in cancer. And I think if I remember right, season 3, right? His name is Alex, and we talked there early on in the conversation. The flow was always the same, especially after season 3 when I realized I needed the flow. But we had an opening, sort of a cold open, and it was just whatever the quote was that I thought resembled the most the theme of the conversation. And then I used basically an hourglass as my framework for every conversation. So we would start wide and broad, and I would try to elicit some sort of broad narrative from whoever I was talking to. And then I would pick out a couple key things because we never set the conversation. The whole point was to be informal and authentic, like the audience was eavesdropping on something cool. And so I would pick out a couple key things from the narrative, and I would sort of work my way down until we got to like the core aspect of vulnerability in a public setting, which is talking about your values and things that make you tick on an interpersonal or intrapersonal level. And then from there, we broaden it back out and make our way towards the end of the conversation with essentially the same topics in reverse to reiterate, to summarize, tie in all the lessons learned. And then at the end of the show, they'd have a couple minutes or whatever so how can people learn more? What's your product? What's your service? What's your business? What's your website? Whatever. And through the post-production process, I would add in advertisements based on PSAs involving value and local businesses that I thought embodied missions or did things, services, whatever, that helped the cause. But through that, the first part of the conversation, for example, talking to now Dr. Lynn, we talked about genotype and phenotype and the importance of how genes presented themselves in cellular structures and that role in cancer development. And that was the narrative he decided to roll with. And I totally out of my depth. I don't know anything about cells. I don't remember cellular biology. I was totally, what questions do I even ask? And so we talked about the role that genes have in cells to make people appear how they appear. Why don't I look like you? Why doesn't somebody else have the same skill sets I do? Why do identical twins look the same but act differently, right? And so we started talking about these nuances between people's appearance, which led us into nuances in behavior, even if there's a similar upbringing. And that's what brought us into culture. And then from there, we went into bias, and that's what brought us into value. And as we started putting this pattern together and talking through how he went from, or the experience he had as a platoon commander in the Marine Corps Infantry, and then theoretically the new guy in med school, where you're not on a pedestal at all. You're the new guy, whereas in the Marine Corps, you got a commission. You're already 9 steps above everybody else. So his point was that experience not only brought him humility, but also helped him to identify these other patterns and biases and how he viewed the world, either similarly enough to relate now to these early young 20-year-olds that are in med school and he's in his late 20s, or as a commissioned officer in the Marine Corps, now as a senior officer.
So transacting value is almost like listening into a conversation, but the conversation is very well structured and covers someone having gone through something similar like yourself, and then coming out, like you say, as the butterfly, as that somebody that went through the chrysis transformation and is now a better person as a result. And it sounds like you have over 200 opportunities, conversations with people where they've expressed this. You started, ironically, on Halloween in 2021, and then concluded in August of 2025. So it's not like you've been off of the air. Right now it's May of 2026. This interview will air forever and ever and ever. However, you're in the process of transitioning. You're no longer an actively holding interviews, but the interviews that you did hold, they continue to air on REITs across America. They air several of they don't air all of them, but they air 10 to 12 of those episodes. Listeners can go to the Apple podcast where all seasons 1 through 6 are out there. So, yep, listeners.
Spotify as well.
And Spotify as well. So, folks, you can go out there, look up Transacting Value, and get an idea of certainly what season 1 is like. I'm interested now. And see how Josh has gone from developing a show of his own to including others. And then you're looking to start things up again. You don't really have a timeline established on when, but you're in the process of doing that. In the meantime, listeners, again, can go out to Spotify and Apple Podcasts and keep their ear tuned to Reads Across America to listen to Transacting Value. And if anybody's got a little bit more curiosity about this, they can reach out via email to jporthouse@sdytmedia.com. That's JPORTHOUSE at SDYTmedia.com. Or they can just call them at 813-421-9249. That number again is 813-421-9249. And your show isn't strictly for veterans, but it's got a solid base, one, because you are a veteran. And while you reach to a number of veterans, it's really something that everybody can walk away from with a completely turned around perspective. And not only across the United States, but globally, with the exception of South America, which who knows, maybe someone listening today will go, you know what, that's for me. And they're somewhere in South America. That's quite something.
It really is. And as far as I can tell, I've got the largest collection in the United States of individual confirmation of personal values. I think that's a pretty powerful scatter plot to at least hypothesize. In terms of humanities and social sciences, people aren't as different as you think. It's a facade in most cases, right? Because it's political, it's financial, it's whatever external factors apply. But it took me embodying, and I don't even mean this as a joke. It took me embodying multiple personalities to develop multiple perspectives, record myself, talking to myself, and then listen to myself talking to myself to realize, whoa, I can teach myself in this process. And in a way, like we talked about earlier, podcasting sort of became my therapy in that process. And it was cathartic. It was fun. I was learning all kinds of new stuff. And the crazy thing is, in 1 hour, and I'm sure you can relate on your show too, in 1 hour, I was able to take somebody from total stranger, I mean, no conversation before hitting record, from total stranger to now, literally, I text probably at least half of everybody I had on the show, even still. Just to say hi to everybody. And that's in 1 hour. And I've never met more than probably 4 or 5 people on that show. Everybody else is there. So, yeah, there's a lot of things I think that podcasting can teach. But when it comes to transacting value, handing a portion of yourself to somebody and receiving a portion of somebody back, it really does kind of change the world, one person at a time.
Ladies and gentlemen, we've been talking with former, having served in uniform, Marine Corps Gunnery Sergeant Josh Porthouse, who is the key person behind a podcast called Transacting Value, available on Reads Across America, Spotify, and Apple Podcast. A very interesting perspective on life, a very global perspective. Stick around and you'll hear a separate interview with him as his time in the Marine Corps. But very interesting speaking with you, Josh. You have a very healthy way forward that you've developed for yourself as well as others. We say here on Veterans Corner Radio that our veterans are worth their value in gold, and you certainly match, if not exceed, that standard. Thank you very much for your time today and for all that you're doing for people around the world.
Absolutely. And I appreciate the time and your perspective, plus the opportunity, Joe. And if I've got 10 more seconds, let me just add, you mentioned that project earlier. I partnered with American Legion Post 108 here in the greater Tampa Bay area to put together a more veteran-centric radio station. We're going to start digitally. Eventually, we'll be terrestrial. Eventually, we'll be Beasley Media. Who knows? But the idea is to take these types of conversations to people about resources, events, show people that even though they think they've lost their purpose, they don't have to lose hope because they're not as different as they think. There is a community out here. And in building that radio station, it's not free. And the reason I stopped producing Transacting Value last summer is because I ran out of money to pay everybody. And it was all out of pocket. Well, I was an idiot. Now I understand the importance of sponsorship. So I am actively looking for a studio sponsor, a station sponsor, no sponsor, segment sponsor, whatever tier, to help invigorate that construct that there is still, let me say, value still holds value.
Listeners, pay attention. You may be helping your own self. Thanks so much.
You've been listening to Veterans Corner Radio with your host, retired United States Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Joe Muhlberger. The views expressed on this program are those of Joe and his guests and our opinions based on the best available information. In matters of law or governmental regulation, it will always be best to check with the appropriate agency. Thanks for listening, and we hope you'll join us for the next program on Veterans Corner Radio.
Here's a quick final thought. If you're enjoying these podcasts, why not take a minute to subscribe or mark Veterans Corner Radio as a favorite? It's easy, and you'll be set to be among the first to find out when new podcasts are published. And thanks again for listening to Veterans Corner Radio.